Today I'll be working in my workbook called The Jews Return from Exile, Part 2, which is the arrival of Ezra. This is the second book in Ezra. Ezra is a difficult book to study and to teach because it's like written from an accountant or a bookkeeper instead of a true writer. So it's a very difficult book to teach. I've already put in the first part of Ezra, and there's quite a time gap between the first part of Ezra and the second part of Ezra. Um, and in that time gap is the book of Esther, which has already been inputted as well. In fact, I have a timeline here for you. So, Ezra 1 through 6, which is already on YouTube, it has to do with when they first came to Jerusalem to rebuild. And Zerubbabel led the group to Jerusalem. The altars rebuilt, the temple foundation laid, and then it's completed in the first 6 chapters. Okay, and in that during that time, Haggai and Zechariah were the prophets of that time. Then we have quite a gap, and during that gap, Esther's story exists. King Xerxes of the Persian Empire is on the throne, and he's the one there. Then, as you see, there's quite a gap between Ezra 6 and Ezra 7. Ezra now leads the group. Ezra actually wasn't part of the first group, which is helpful to understand because he shows up in Nehemiah's books, and there would be no way that the people from the beginning group could be there at the end, even though their names are mentioned several times. So now we're in Ezra 7 through 10, which is when Ezra comes onto the scene. And so that's important to realize that just because the whole book is named Ezra, Ezra doesn't even show up until chapter 7. Again, this is the route that they will take from Babylon down to Jerusalem. And in this book, there's only 5 chapters. This finishes the book of Ezra. And we'll be doing chapter 1 today. Notice that, again, this is kind of written by a bookkeeper. Chapter 2 is a summary of what they do and then a detail. So it's kind of an interesting way of doing that. It was very hard book to put together because of how it is written, but I was able to do it. So there you go. Now, the timeline of this book, we have these various timelines, and I imagine that we'll be coming back to this occasionally. And if you notice, we are actually in probably right around 518 BC, starts again, or even issues decree, I think, Ezra 6. Am I right? We started Ezra 6. Well, actually later than that too. All right. Okay, I see the reign of Xerxes there. So now we're in the reign of Artaxerxes, and that's where we are, 465 to 424 BC. Okay, that's where we are. And note here that there are 2 other theories. This is the theory that I've decided works for the book, but there are 2 other theories regarding the dates of Ezra's arrival. One, Ezra arrives in 428 BC after Nehemiah and during the 37th year of Artaxerxes. This theory claims there was an error in the Bible in Ezra 7:7 and that it should have read 37th year, not the 7th year. I disagree with that because I don't believe there's an error in the Bible like that. Number 2, Ezra arrives in 398 BC, the 7th year of Artaxerxes II, which would make the coexistence of Ezra and Nehemiah 8:9 difficult, but not impossible. I've decided to accept the most popular theory of leaving the Bible as written, which I normally do. That's my critique, for many reasons. 2 main ones being Ezra was a scribe. He knew the point of accuracy of what is written down. If it was Artaxerxes II, he would have written it that way. And the Bible is God's holy word. God is certainly able to not let errors in the text that would mislead the reader. So that's why I've gone with the most popular theory that he comes the arrival of Ezra is 458 BC, the last line of our timeline of the book here. Okay. And again, this is a map of Jerusalem during Ezra and Nehemiah. The walls of Jerusalem show up quite visibly in the first part of Nehemiah's book, which I will be inputting after this one. Okay, chapter 1. The Samaritans stopped the rebuilding of the walls. Ezra 4:6 through 23. At the beginning of the reign of Xerxes, they, the Samaritans, lodged an accusation against the people of Judah and Jerusalem regarding the building of the walls of Jerusalem. And in the days of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Mishlam, Madradath, Tabeel, and the rest of his associates wrote a letter to Artaxerxes. The letter was written in Aramaic script and in Aramaic language. Rehum, the commanding officer, and Shimshai, the secretary, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes, the king, as follows. Nothing else is known of Bislam, Madradath, not the same person as the treasurer of Persia in Ezra 1:8, Tabeel, Rehum, not the same as the one of the 11 men that led the first group of exiles to Jerusalem, and Shimshai, other than what is written in these passages of Ezra. So we know nothing more about these men. First, the Samaritans sent a letter to King Xerxes. Do we hear any result from the accusation lodged with King Xerxes? No, there's no results of the book there. How long is King Xerxes' reign? Well, King Xerxes' reign is 20 years. So, see on the bottom there? I was getting my answers out. I know better than to try to work this without my answers. Okay, sorry. Assuming the letter was sent to King Artaxerxes at the beginning of his reign, what year would that have been? Beginning of Artaxerxes' reign is 464 BC. The Jerusalem temple was finished in 515 BC, and the Samaritans been waiting since then for a response from a king. How long has it been so far? So 515 minus 464 and would be the Samaritans have waited 51 years for a response from the king. What language was the letter written in? Aramaic. Aramaic was the language of the Persians and diplomatic language of the time. As Daniel, the writer of the book of Daniel, resided in Babylon, during this time, some of his book is written in Aramaic. Most of the book of Ezra is also written in Aramaic. So then the letter goes, Rehum, the commanding officer, and Shimshai, the secretary, together with the rest of their associates, the judges, officials, and administrators over the people from Persia, Iraq, and Babylon, the Amalekites of Susa, and the other people whom the great and honorable Ashurbanipal deported and settled in the city of Samaria and somewhere elsewhere in Euphrates. The Samaritans are from Babylon, Iraq, near Ur, and Susa. Find these cities. Using rivers as a means of travel for as long as you can, draw how these people would have gotten to Samaria. Okay, so we have find these cities. Babylon, Ur, Susa. Susa, of course, is the town that shows up quite often in Esther. That's where the story of Esther exists. It's right there in the town of Susa. Using the rivers as a means of travel for as long as you can, draw how these people would have gotten to Samaria. So the rivers, and the reason why the rivers is that you can work on the rivers. So you bring the rivers up and then you come down to Samaria. So to see that pathway there, then you can come down to Samaria. Okay. So those are the three cities, and they would travel up the river and then down. To King Artaxerxes, from your servants in Trans-Euphrates, that is everything from east of the Euphrates River, west of the Euphrates, west and south of the Euphrates River. The king should know that the people who came up to us from you have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are restoring the walls and repairing the foundations. Furthermore, the king should know that if this city is built and its walls are restored, no more taxes, tribute, or duty will be paid, and eventually the royal revenues will suffer. Note, Transphrates means everything west of the Euphrates River. So as you see, they're trying to stir up trouble. They're restoring the walls, repairing the foundations, which is what the king had told them that they could do. Um, then they make it knowledge that isn't necessarily true. The walls are restored, no more taxes, tribute, or duty will be paid. Well, where do they get that information? So, but they're just trying to rile up the king. What words did the Samaritans use to describe Jerusalem? Rebellious and wicked city. What do the Samaritans tell the king the Jews are doing? They're restoring the walls and repairing the foundations of the temple. What do the Samaritans say will be result if the walls and foundations are built? No more taxes, tribute, or duty will be paid. The Samaritans did not have any proof that the revenues would suffer, so why would they say this? To rile up the king, because the king deals with revenue. Now, since we are under obligation to the palace, and it isn't proper for us to see the king dishonored, we are sending this message to inform the king, so that a search may be made in the archives of your predecessors. In these records, you will find that this city is a rebellious city, troublesome to kings and provinces, a place with a long history of sedition. That is why this city was destroyed. We inform the king that if this city is built and its walls are restored, you'll be left with nothing in Trans-Euphrates. So basically, they're saying search the records, and they tell them specifically what to search for. That this is a rebellious city that has long history of sedition. After all, the city was destroyed, and why would it have been destroyed if it was doing well, etc. The Babylonian records will back up the Samaritan claim. That's true. From the time King Nebuchadnezzar invaded the southern kingdom of Judah, Jerusalem was a thorn in Nebuchadnezzar's side. Eventually, he had to squelch the rebellion by overthrowing Jerusalem, removing the king, and destroying the temple and the walls of the city. This happened in 586 BC in 2 Kings 25, 8 through 10. Finally, after many years, the Samaritans have a convincing argument to back up their claim that Jerusalem is a rebellious city. What do they want King Artaxerxes to search? Search the records to see just how bad this city is. In these records, you will find that this city is a rebellious city, troublesome to kings and provinces, a place with long history of sedition. The walls of Jerusalem were destroyed in 586 BC. It is now no earlier than 464 BC. How many years has this been? Well, you can do the math, and I will tell you it's 122 years since the walls had originally been destroyed. So as the king sent this reply, Jehoram and the commanding officer, Shimshai, the secretary, and the rest of their associates living in Samaria and elsewhere in Trans-Euphrates. The letter you sent us has been read and translated in my presence. I issued an order, and a search was made, and it was found that the city has a long history of revolt against kings, has been a place of rebellion and sedition. Jerusalem has had powerful kings ruling over the whole of Trans-Euphrates, and taxes and tribute and duty were paid to them. Now issue an order to these men to stop work, so that this city will not be rebuilt until I so order. Be careful not to collect this manner. Why let this threat grow to the detriment of the royal interests? So he was focused on a certain area of the Chronicles, so he went there, and sure enough, it shows Jerusalem is a troublesome city. He was not focused on the decree that was written later that said that they needed to rebuild. So he then comes to this conclusion to stop the rebuilding. As soon as the copy of the letter of King Artaxerxes was read to Rehum and Shimshai, the secretary and their associates, they went immediately to the Jews in Jerusalem and compelled them by force to stop. Did Jerusalem have a long history of revolt against kings? Yes. Did Jerusalem have powerful kings in the past that had taxes and tribute paid to them? Yes. Now an issue on now issue a order to these men to stop work so that this city will not be rebuilt until I so order. Did the Samaritans succeed in stopping the work on the walls of Jerusalem? Yes. And these walls will not start again until Nehemiah comes. Notice what it says. They compelled them by force to stop. How do you think the Samaritans compelled the Jews by force to start building? I think the Samaritans probably used weapons or pushed the builders away from the wall. Well, because the builders had gotten a previous approval to do so, to rebuild Jerusalem. They have rebuilt the temple. It's time to rebuild the wall to protect the temple. So now we come to the crossword. Okay, 2 across. King Artaxerxes told the Samaritans to stop the rebuilding of the wall. 4, King Artaxerxes is the king of Persia. Trans-Euphrates means west of the Euphrates River. 8, the Samaritans complained about the walls of Jerusalem being rebuilt. 1 down, the Samaritans sent a letter to 2 kings of Persia. One was Xerxes and the other one was Artaxerxes. 3, well, who was the secretary of the Samaritans? Shimshai. The letters were written in the Aramaic language. And who was the commanding officer of the Samaritans? Rehum. So that's the end of this chapter. I hope you were able to enjoy it and it helped you to understand the book of Ezra. And hopefully we'll see you again. Talk to you later.